My name is Charles Anderson. I'm the president of Augsburg College here in Minneapolis, and it's my pleasure to be able to introduce this brief program on one of the very important rooms here at the college. The City of Augsburg Room is located on the second floor of the Christensen Center here on campus. It contains memorabilia, reproductions, and some original artifacts dating back to the date of founding of the city of Augsburg in Germany, a founding which took place in 15 BC. The room serves a purpose on campus of reminding us of and allowing us opportunity to honor our historical, theological, and cultural roots. We're very fortunate today to have two individuals who were deeply involved in the planning and the construction of this particular room. The first is Dr. Oscar Anderson, longtime president of the college, and the second is Bert Fosse, Oscar's colleague for many years, who served as the vice president for finance and management. These two were involved in the development of the concept of the room, in its planning and in its construction. We're very fortunate also to have a longtime faculty member, Grace Sullerud, an associate professor and librarian, who will conduct the interview. You are welcome here.
What motivated you to develop a room called the City of Augsburg Room in this college center?
Well, we, of course, were very much aware of the background of this college in terms of its name, Augsburg. And the institution was named for the Augsburg Confession by the founder, who had been a professor at Augustana Seminary in Illinois. And when he took the Norwegian contingent out of that seminary, which was conducted with the Swedes, to Marshall, Wisconsin, he wanted to show that he too was as confessionally correct as the Swedes, who had the Latin form, Augustana. So he took the German form, Augsburg, for the Augsburg Confession of 1530. And that's how the name came about. Well, it was our feeling that with a name like that, there should be some place that commemorates the significance of the city itself. And that's why we wanted a City of Augsburg room, like we had a Minneapolis room and a Marshall room. And so this was undeveloped when we first built and dedicated this building. There was nothing in here. It was a kind of a evolution.
Yeah, I think there, at that time, the development of college centers or student student unions, whatever you call it, they had a number of practical functions, and often it was the room in which the college entertained its guests and its VIPs and so on. And that was commonly developed in those kinds of places, and this was ours. But as Oscar said, we chose to commemorate the name of the city in this room.
Did the college fund it, or did you have some special funds to acquire the material here?
What was the case there?
The date that we put this together?
Well, the funding that made it possible for us to develop this.
Oh, you mean the whole?
The room.
I can't remember the date. It was time for the 100th anniversary of the institution, 1969.
That's right.
And that commemorated the start of the institution in Marshall in 1969.
We had a benefactor whose name was connected with this place, Sverdrup.
Oh,
The
Who
second
was that?
president of this institution was Sverdrup. And the fourth president was Sverdrup. And they had this General Leif Sverdrup, who had been MacArthur's chief engineer during World War II,
In the Pacific.
who had a huge firm in St. Louis. And we got a gift of money from him for this room, and also from Lutheran Brotherhood.
Yes.
oh yes.
I don't remember the amounts, but I do remember. There's a plaque here that commemorates those gifts.
What were your roles in planning the room and what is in it?
Well, as the institution's, I guess, planner, you could say, liaison with architects, builders, engineers, I was the implementer, let's put it that way. And, but I was also involved in the planning, the concepts, and tried to interpret in physical things some of Oscar's, what is not imagination, but what he wanted to accomplish in terms of this commemoration project. And I tried to put some of these things in place. I guess that was my role.
Well, and you and I helped develop all of the details of the room. For instance, the lighting was one thing. And then as things came along, we kind of worked together. Well, how are we going to do this? I think one of the things that we really enjoyed doing was the Daniel window.
Daniel window, yeah.
And there's an interesting story behind that. But we may be getting ahead of what you want us to talk about.
No, that'll be fine. You might want to start with the window and tell us your story.
My recollection, and you can correct me, Bert, is that Ida Johnson was instrumental, one of the professors here, in getting us to move in the direction of bringing that window to the Augsburg Room. The oldest stained glass windows in the world at World War II time were in the cathedral in Augsburg, dating back to 12th century, or what, 10?
1094, I think.
All right.
Something like that.
And Dr. and Mrs. Johnson attended the World Council of Churches meeting in Lund, Sweden. And there was a stained glass concern from Munich, Germany. And they were displaying their wares. And among those, among that display, there were windows that they had created for the Augsburg Cathedral to be put in there in case the original windows were destroyed by the war. So one of the windows, they're called the prophet windows, one of the windows was this Daniel window. And they had taken the windows out during the war and they were preserved. So when they were put back in the cathedral, they had these to show off and sell.
Yeah, imagine the Nazis never paid for them to duplicate the windows.
Oh, that's right. But when I don't know the particulars or remember how we got a hold of it and how we paid for it, but at least it arrived, and you had the idea of creating a kind of a window setting with illumination behind. And that was one of your great contributions to the, and I'm proud of that, because if you want to see the prophet window that was in Augsburg, you have to come here because they've now taken them out again due to pollution.
Yeah.
Well, in looking around the room, I see wonderful entrance gates that there may be a story about them too.
Yep, there's
The wrought iron.
That's Bert's story.
Those are very nice.
When we're in Augsburg, I picked up a postcard of the gate to the St. Anna Church. It's been variously called church or convent or college. And this is the picture, which shows a gate from the city street into the courtyard of this church. And there's a gate here. So we took that gate took this picture and designed a gate for the room from this postcard. And it was made in Canarransey, Minnesota. An alumnus, Lauren Halverson, who had a furniture company in Cottonwood, had lived, I think, or had relatives in Canarransey. And there was a German immigrant who was keeping farm machinery operating in the Canarransey community. But he was apprenticed as a decorative iron worker in Germany. He was a very sensitive, skilled gentleman. And between doing combines and plows and so on, he did decorative iron work in Sioux Falls, Laverne, some of the cities in that area. And Laura knew about him, so we went down and we persuaded Mr. Weiss, what is his first name?
That's what we call it.
Adolf or something like that, to do this window.
For the gates.
Weiss, Weiss,
The gate,
W-E-I, the gate, yeah.
The gate, yeah.
To do the gate. And I made several trips down there. One of the most interesting, he had, I guess I developed the drawing, and he had enlarged it and chalked it out on the floor, which was the pattern. And then he worked with these steel metal rods to reproduce this gate. The fascinating thing about it, he did it in a more clever way than it was the original gates. These loops that you see on the top, he developed that by twisting and interleaving the iron posts. The original gate was a series of pieces of iron. They were clipped together. They were not interwoven as Mr. Weiss did it. And he was a lovely old gentleman, a lovely old wife. It was nice to go down and sit in the kitchen and have her take the cozy off the coffee pot and serve us coffee and cake.
You said that the blacksmith shop had a dirt floor.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how he marked it, but he did, and I think it's a lovely job. When Dale Westberg and I were visiting Europe, really to buy the furnishings for both this building and Ernest Tower in Norway. En route back home, we went through Augsburg and spent a couple of days there. This was pre-Linda Linder, I think. But you had written a greeting to the mayor of the city of Augsburg. And Dale and I brought your greeting to the mayor of the city of Augsburg, who wasn't there, but we were passed on to, as we have done here at Augsburg, to the public relations person. And he promised to do everything he could to help us acquire objects for this room. And then the other important person, I think, was Linda Linder, who was on site and had a great sensitivity for the history of the city. And she did a great deal to expedite our getting at a number of these.
Is she from Augsburg, Germany?
She lives in Augsburg,
her husband lived
Germany.
in Augsburg. Now, I never found out, maybe you remember, why the symbol of the city of Augsburg is a pine cone on top of a capital, of a pillar. You'll see it in that flag, and you'll also see it in that big reproduction over there of the pine cone and capital. And there's another, that piece there with the, is that some kind of a feast over there? That on the wall?
Well, the bronze thing is a three-dimensional thing of the Wappen of Augsburg. That has the pine cone.
And capital too. Yeah.
Linda told me that it's a symbol of life. I acquired a number of things. Some of these etchings that you see on the wall were acquired from the Vogel house. It was a kind of a gallery sort of place. And it was very common in Europe to have these etchings of prominent sites in the city. And we bought that. At one time we had a map displayer of the walled city. And
That was one of the things in the city was the Fuggerei.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And that was established by Jacob Fugger, who was one of the great bankers of the Middle Ages, for the poor people.
I visited in Germany, at Augsburg once, and that's the one thing I remember about the city was the walk through
The
that.
Fuggerei.
Beautifully designed, very nicely
Beautifully
designed.
and
area.
it was a housing development.
Right.
There are 2 watercolors over on that wall that were painted by a man who was proud of the fact his first name was August Mulder. And August Mulder was a refugee from Lithuania? Latvia. And he was forced into a concentration camp or some kind of encampment in Augsburg, Germany. He was a lawyer by education, but he loved to paint. And he would take his watercolors down into the town and paint the urban scenes. There's the cathedral, and there's the city square, and he had this collection. And we asked him to give us a couple of paintings that he had made, watercolors, of Augsburg. Included in that collection was one painting that showed where the watercolors had frozen as he painted. It was so cold. We didn't choose that one, but those 2 were painted by August Mulder. August Mulder then went to Australia, and he didn't like it in Australia, so he came to Minneapolis. But in the meantime, he had developed a great interest in stained glass, and he began to work stained glass that constituted big chunks,
Yeah, it's quite thick.
very thick. And when he got here, and I don't know when he met his wife, but she worked for General Mills, and he needed some kind of an epoxy to bond these pieces of glass. And the research department at General Mills developed this epoxy, and he was able to make stained glass windows. There are many stained glass windows in the Twin City Federal buildings in this town. But one of his best pieces is right here in the meditation chapel in the center. And it is in memory of Dr. Bernard Christensen's daughter. It's
Naomi.
a resurrection
Naomi's.
window. And it is a beautiful thing. But then he came on the faculty here. And he died, still on the faculty here, painting and doing stained glass. So there's a very interesting story that traces all of this, reminding us that August Mulder was also a part of this. I always hoped, Bert, that we could get that window into stained glass by August Mulder. But it's not a dream that we realized.
No.
Then there's a statue in the corner. I think that's done by an Augsburg graduate. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that Terry Saturn's?
Terry Center
Yeah.
And Luther, Here I Stand
is the motif for
name
that.
of it. Yeah. I want to say a word about the coats of arms that grace this wall. And they are especially beautiful, not only because they themselves have real beauty and value, but because Bert here is a professional framer. And he has framed all, I think, of the pictures and so on in this room. Because if we wanted anything framed, Bert would do it. And at one time, he was the president of the Picture Framers of America.
Yeah,
and you
but
see the status he attained.
Great achievement.
Well, yeah, you've been framed. Anyway, let me tell you the story. Do you know the story how I got this?
Yes, I do.
At one time, I was at church headquarters for the Evangelical Lutheran Church at the time, and the head of the Augsburg Publishing House, which carried the same name as the college because it began at Augsburg College, was a man by the name of Randolph Haugen. and he was a great connoisseur of fine pictures and paintings, and his greatest achievement outside of the publishing house was the magazine Christmas. That was his production. Anyway, in his office, which was tucked way back in the corner of Augsburg Publishing House, he had these coats of arms on the wall, and I said, "What are those?" He said, "Those are the coats of arms of the signatories of the Augsburg Confession." And there were, what do we got there? 9 of them? 9 signatories. And he had them there. They were in color. And one day I said to him, "I sure would like to have those in the Augsburg Room." Randy Haugen sent them over. And they became ours. And of course the next step was to get Bert Fosse to frame them. And so you can find these signatories properly commemorated. There was another picture we had around here, and I don't know where it is, of the man who read the Augsburg Confession to the Emperor Charles. It used to be over on that wall.
It's out in the,
Is it out
I think
there?
it's in the entryway.
it's out in the entryway now.
You see, Luther was not allowed to come to Augsburg, Germany, because he was too much of a hothead, and they didn't want him around stirring up things. So they put him in the castle at Saxe-Coburg, and he sent Melanchthon to Augsburg to give the presentation of what the Protestants believed. And Melanchthon drew up the Augsburg Confession. And this was to be read to the emperor at the imperial diet. The interesting thing about that is the man who read it to the emperor was a layman.
Oh, is it? I didn't know
Right.
that.
And that's the significance or the beginning of the Augsburg Confession, and we've told about how that all developed.
Yeah. The other parts of the confession is the public relations man in the mayor's office said, "I don't know that we could find a copy of the Augsburg Confession," but he said, "I think I have seen somewhere photographs of the frontispieces." And he said, "If I can find those, I will send them to you." And he sent us, so these are photographic reproductions of the frontispiece of the confession document.
One of them is of the confession, and the other is the apology of the Augsburg Confession, which was an expansion of it.
Sort of like Luther's explanation.
Yeah,
of it.
right.
What does this mean?
But I think we're getting across, I hope, the point that there isn't any other place in, I'm going to say, North America, where all of this is brought together in one spot. And of course, we have enjoyed through the years, you and I, of entertaining people in a place which has this historical significance.
Beaucoup conversational pieces.
Bert, there is another thing that you helped design, and that's that bookcase over there with those books.
Yeah. I think truly, if books can be called artifacts, that can be truly called an artifact. Some of those books are 16th century printings of Luther's works and Melanchthon and so on. And they, from a biased point of view, an awful lot of stuff gets just buried in an archive. And so we talked, I think Carlos Oslins was librarian at the time, and we talked him out of these German printed volumes from the archive, and we developed this bookcase.
Margaret Anderson did the cataloging, I remember. I
Did
was
she?
on the library staff at that time.
Did
Yes,
she?
she knows German, and she did a very good job.
And who made those, the bookcase and the
Hole,
who?
not Irving, but Henry Hole.
Henry? Oh.
We made those bookcases right in the shop over here
Is
on
that
Riverside Avenue. I spent more time than I should have supervising that. Remember the walls? We were trying to get this thing done for the deadline of the celebration of 1969. And we finally found this wall material was manufactured in California, and to meet the deadline, we had to fly it in air freight cargo. I don't suppose you
never asked
remember
me
that.
about
I never asked. I just did it.
Those walls that look like wood?
Yes.
Yeah.
They
Oh, yeah.
actually are wood.
They are?
They are wood,
okay.
and they're special kind of plaster.
Oh,
But that has a texture and color that is very, very similar to a certain kind of limestone or marble, whose name I can't remember.
And then we kind of,
And then the
Got the
tile, the tiles here reminded us of the sort of floors that we saw in
yeah, I like those.
the
I like
churches
that a lot.
and the monasteries over there. But that's not a very practical floor for the usage what this room got, and so we bordered it with tile and then set the carpeting in the center of it with a sort of royal blue color. That's how that came together. One of the interesting challenges, speaking from a framer's point of view, and dealing with customers or framers, what are your interests? What sort of theme are you trying to develop? And my couch is, this is this color I want a picture to go nice with the couch. They don't have any care about the picture at all, itself at all. But this is a great opportunity for a thematic sort of decorative development. And I think it's more that than a collection of genuine artifacts. The genuine artifacts would be impossible for an institution to acquire in this century. But they reflect very well, I think, this historic city. So it's a kind of a commemorative room.
and it almost seems to me to have more commemoration to it than when we first put it together.
Yeah, right.
You've now have time to sit and look at it. At that time, you were probably too busy.
And when I
Developing
entertained a very famous Lutheran minister from Chicago by the name of A.R. Christensen, I told him about my dreams for this room, and he had a book of medieval art, and he inscribed that book and gave it to me as the first gift to the future Augsburg Room. Okay.
Thank you both
Okay.
for being here and recalling all of these good tales about the
It's a
room.
pleasure.